We are finally here. One of Lando Norris, Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri will become the 2025 world champion come the end of Abu Dhabi, and it is a very, very exciting time to be a Formula 1 fan going into a title decider. And so in terms of how the championship currently stands heading into that final race, we have Lando Norris at the top on 408 points, Max Verstappen in second place after taking that win in Qatar with McLaren's blunder with the pit stops. He is on 396 points, just 12 behind Lando, and it's definitely fair to say that Oscar Piastri is now the outsider, 16 points behind Lando Norris in third place. First of all, let's talk about Oscar Piastri because he definitely goes into this weekend as the outsider and kind of with nothing to lose in a way. And now, in terms of all of the permutations, Formula 1 have created a very good graphic. So yeah, when it comes to Oscar, it is pretty simple, unfortunately. He basically has to finish either first or second, and realistically, if he doesn't win the race, then he's got almost no chance of winning the championship. And even then, if he does win the race, Lando has to finish 6th or lower, and if he finishes 2nd, then Lando has to just scrape into the points in 10th place, and Max has to finish 4th or lower to become the world champion. And now, if I was to make a case for Oscar Piastri, and again, he comes into this race as the outsider, the guy with the least amount of points going into this title decider, and actually worse, his teammate is the guy that's actually leading the championship. What I would say for Oscar is that just in the nick of time in Qatar, he finally was able to find that dominant championship level pace that he had earlier in the season, and that basically allowed him to lead the championship for the majority of the year. Despite all of the terrible races that he has had in the last third of this season, Qatar stands out in his own words as probably the best weekend in terms of pace in his racing career. He qualified on pole for the sprint, dominated the sprint, qualified on pole for the race, nailed the start of the Grand Prix, and let's be honest, had it not been for McLaren's blunder, he would have gone on to dominate the Grand Prix as well. The positive for Oscar is that even though he didn't get the result that he deserved, he arguably had his best weekend of the season last time out, and he has to take that momentum, he has to take that speed and that confidence that he does have the pace to become world champion into Abu Dhabi. I think it's also fair to say that given the form over the recent years and also this season, McLaren probably will have the better car in Abu Dhabi. They were very strong here last year, and let's not forget we didn't really get to see how Oscar's race would have played out because he got taken out by Max on lap 1, but he was also very strong here last year. So given that momentum that he is bringing in from Qatar, given that the car should be a little bit stronger than the Red Bull, and also the fact that in terms of pressure, whilst there is no doubt that there is a lot more pressure on both Oscar and also Lando given the state and the season that McLaren have put together and how their championship has collapsed and how they have opened the door time and time again, both the driver and team, to Max for even being in this title decider with an opportunity, it must be said that in terms of pressure, there is a hell of a lot more on Lando Norris. He is the one leading the championship right now with a semi-comfortable gap, and he is also the experienced driver. When you look at it like that, whilst I don't think that Oscar is going to be able to win this championship, he should be able to maybe dominate this weekend by qualifying on pole ahead of the other two drivers and then controlling the race from there on out, which we have seen him do time and time again. After that, he is going to need some luck. He is going to need his rivals to make mistakes. He is going to need some crazy things to happen in this title decider for him to win this championship. But one thing that we have seen over the years in title deciders is that these are not normal races. Strange and bizarre things that you cannot predict normally do and hopefully will happen on Sunday. And next up, let's talk about Max Verstappen. And now, in terms of his title hopes and his title permutations, he goes into this race 12 points behind Lando Norris, which I don't think anyone saw coming, especially after Zandvoort. And if he wants to become a 5-time consecutive world champion, then he would essentially also need to win the race and for Lando to finish outside of the podium. However, after that, for him to finish 2nd or 3rd, even though mathematically he could still become champion, it gets very unrealistic because then McLaren would need to have a disaster of a weekend to where they are basically just scraping points to try to hold on to the championship, which I just do not see as being a remote possibility. I think it's worth saying before I get into the case for Max Verstappen is that I actually think that he is going to be the one to win it. If I had to predict someone, I would go with Max Verstappen. I just feel like what we have seen from McLaren, all of these mistakes from the drivers a few races ago, Lando the past couple of races in Vegas and then also in Qatar, and then just the team as a whole in Qatar and Vegas as well. This team is collapsing under pressure. The bigger and the more higher leveraged races that we have had towards the end of the season, the more mistakes that McLaren seem to be making. And Abu Dhabi is going to be an environment, it is going to be a race that they have never ever had to deal with in terms of the amount of pressure they're going to be under. And I will be stunned if they make absolutely no mistakes both on the team and also on the driver's side. I guess in a really weird way, the case for Max is McLaren. He just needs to keep doing exactly what he has been doing all season, and that is maximizing the performance of his car. I think that as a team, even though Red Bull sometimes have their stumbling blocks, and even in Qatar for example, Max didn't start the weekend on a great note, they always get the car throughout the weekend into a good enough window to either win the race outright or at least put Max in a position to put the McLarens under pressure. And I just do not see a scenario where McLaren's recent form and their papaya rules will not lead them into making mistakes, and then if they do, Max Verstappen is going to do exactly what he has been doing all season long, and that is taking advantage of every single mistake that McLaren is making, and he is going to win the Grand Prix and score the full 25 points. However, the biggest weapon in Max's armory is his experience and his ability under pressure. All of the pressure and all of the expectation is going to be on the two McLaren drivers to just get this thing over the line regardless of how ugly the result is at the end of Sunday, whilst when it comes to Max, there is no pressure and there is no expectations because no one expected for Max, and that includes him and his team by the way, that they'd even be in this position come Abu Dhabi. What that means is that Max is going into this weekend on an absolute high after stealing Qatar. He is on an absolute high to just enjoy the weekend for what it is, and that is another opportunity to win a Grand Prix, and the cherry on top is just this opportunity to potentially steal the title from the two McLaren drivers and become a consecutive 5-time Drivers' Champion. Last up, let's talk about Lando Norris. And now his title chances are a little bit more complicated, however, as the title leader, all he has to do is finish on the podium. However, were he to have a bad weekend similar to Qatar or similar to Azerbaijan and finish outside of the podium, which were the last two races where he didn't finish inside of the top 3, then it becomes a lot more complicated, and I think at that point it becomes a lot more worrying in terms of will McLaren try to pull any papaya rules or team order stunts to make him the world champion if Oscar isn't in the mathematical position to be so. Given that Lando does have that 12-point cushion over Max, I think he finds himself in a relatively comfortable position going into this title decider, or at least as comfortable as you can be fighting for your first ever driver's title. All he has to do, as I've said before, is just finish in the top 3. All he has to do is get the absolute bare minimum out of that McLaren around a track that he dominated at last season, and all he has to do is have a mediocre weekend to wrap up the Drivers' Championship. His greatest asset right now is that 12-point cushion because, it must be said, the last 2 Grand Prix have not exactly been a great show of his mental strength. In Las Vegas, even though he qualified on pole with a very good lap, he gave away the race win at the very first corner by outbraking himself and handing it to Max Verstappen despite the disqualification. And in Qatar, he was behind Oscar Piastri for basically the entire weekend in terms of pace, and those are 2 worrying signs given that the momentum in terms of speed is not on his side, even though the points definitely are. Something else that is also in Lando's favour compared to Oscar is that Oscar is going to have to hand his car over for FP1 to a rookie to fulfill the final rookie mandatory session of the year. Lando is going to be continuously in the car, he's going to have that consistency across the weekend, which may or may not make the difference, especially in qualifying, because when it comes to the race, apart from any Latifi madness, which we cannot discount because once again, crazy things usually will and do happen in title deciders, Abu Dhabi is a track that is very difficult to overtake on, and 99% of the time it's a boring one-stop. All of this means that Lando is in a great place with his points advantage, even if perhaps he doesn't have the best momentum going into this race. But yet again, a title decider, the biggest race of your life, with all of the pressure on the line and on your shoulders, it makes people do crazy things. So who exactly is going to be the world champion come the end of this season? I have no clue. but I cannot wait to find out who it's going to be. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.